Picture the Earth 12,000 years ago. The great ice sheets that once buried continents beneath miles of frozen death are retreating. Mammoths still thunder across tundra that will soon become forest. Sea levels rise and fall like the breath of a sleeping giant, swallowing coastlines and birthing new lands. The climate shifts violently, unpredictably reshaping the face of the planet week by week, season by season. This is 10,000 BC, a world in transformation caught between the dying ice age and the birth of something new. For most of human existence, we've been told a simple story. Our ancestors were nomadic hunter-gatherers moving with the herds, living in small bands, possessing no written language, no cities, no monuments. Civilization, we learned, began around 3000 BC in Mesopotamia and Egypt with the first cities, the first writing, the first organized states. Everything before that was prehistory, a long, dark tunnel of human existence where nothing remarkable happened. But that story is crumbling. Across the globe, from the deserts of Turkey to the jungles of Indonesia, from the steppes of Siberia to the coasts of Peru, archaeologists are unearthing evidence that refuses to fit the timeline. Temples that shouldn't exist. Astronomical observatories built by people who supposedly couldn't count past 10. Sophisticated seafaring cultures thriving millennia before the first pyramids. Cities older than civilization itself. Each discovery pushes the origins of human complexity further back, deeper into the mists of the Ice Age, challenging the very foundations of what we thought we knew. These aren't fringe theories or the fantasies of pseudo-archaeologists. These are peer-reviewed discoveries that have stunned the academic world, forcing us to redraw the map of human development. They suggest that between 12,000 and 8,000 BC, during those tumultuous centuries when the ice retreated and the world transformed, something remarkable happened. Cultures rose and fell. Knowledge was gained and lost. Civilizations we can barely imagine left their marks on the landscape before vanishing into myth and legend. The archaeologists who study this period face a unique challenge. They're excavating not just soil and stone, but the very limits of recorded history. Every artifact, every structure, every scrap of evidence from this era rewrites what we think we know. And with each answer comes a dozen new questions, mysteries that may never be fully solved, enigmas that continue to haunt those who dare to dig into humanity's deepest past. So let's journey back to that forgotten world, to the twilight of the Ice Age, to a time when our ancestors were far more remarkable than we ever imagined. Let's uncover 10 mysteries from 10,000 BC that continue to haunt archaeologists to this day. Göbekli Tepe, the temple that shouldn't exist. The Anatolian plateau of southeastern Turkey. The year is 1994. German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt stands on a windswept hill called Göbekli Tepe, Potbelly Hill in Turkish. Local shepherds have known about the place for generations, assuming the limestone slabs jutting from the earth are nothing more than the remnants of a Byzantine cemetery. But Schmidt sees something else. His trained eye recognizes the worked stone, the deliberate placement. He begins to dig. What emerges from the soil over the following decades will shatter every assumption about the origins of civilization. Massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing up to 20 tons, arranged in circles. Intricately carved with reliefs of animals, foxes, lions, scorpions, vultures, serpents, rendered with an artistic sophistication that seems impossibly advanced. Underground chambers connected by corridors. Evidence of feasting, of gathering, of ritual. And then comes the dating. Radiocarbon analysis places the oldest layers at approximately 9500 BC, nearly 12,000 years ago. Let that sink in for a moment. When Göbekli Tepe was built, humans had not yet domesticated plants or animals. The wheel would not be invented for another 5,000 years. Writing was 7,000 years in the future. Stonehenge, often called humanity's oldest architectural marvel, would not be constructed for another 6,000 years. Yet here in the highlands of Turkey, hunter-gatherers were quarrying multi-ton blocks of limestone, transporting them considerable distances, carving them with artistic precision, and erecting them into sophisticated circular structures. The implications are staggering. The conventional narrative tells us that civilization developed in a linear progression. First came agriculture, then permanent settlements, then social complexity, then monumental architecture, then organized religion. Göbekli Tepe turns this sequence on its head. Here is monumental religious architecture before agriculture, before pottery, before permanent villages. The site suggests that organized religion and the social organization required to build temples may have actually preceded and perhaps even catalyzed the development of agriculture, not the other way around. The mystery deepens when you examine how the site was used. There's no evidence of habitation, no hearths, no trash pits, no domestic areas. People came here to build, to gather, to perform rituals, and then they left. For over 1,000 years, different groups added new circles, carved new pillars, feasted and worshipped and departed. And then, around 8,000 BC, they deliberately buried the entire complex. Not destroyed by conquest or abandoned to decay, but carefully, methodically filled in with soil and debris, preserving it for millennia. Why would a culture invest enormous labor in building something only to bury it? Was it an offering, a way of closing a sacred chapter? Did their beliefs change? Did the world change around them in ways that made the old temples obsolete? We may never know. What we do know is that Göbekli Tepe represents a level of social organization, religious thought, and engineering capability that hunter-gatherers were not supposed to possess. And here's the truly haunting part. Göbekli Tepe is not unique. Archaeologists have now identified dozens of similar sites across the region, suggesting that this was not an isolated phenomenon but part of a broader cultural tradition. How many more lie undiscovered, buried beneath farms and villages across Anatolia? What kind of society produced these monuments? What gods did they worship in those circular sanctuaries beneath the stars? The stones of Göbekli Tepe stand silent, their secrets carved in a language we're only beginning to read.
Nabta Playa, Egypt's prehistoric Stonehenge. The Nubian Desert, southern Egypt, 200 miles west of Abu Simbel. Today, it's one of the most inhospitable places on Earth, a sea of sand beneath a merciless sun where nothing grows and nothing lives. But in 10,000 BC, this was a different world entirely. During the African humid period, when the Sahara was green and the now barren desert bloomed with lakes and grasslands, nomadic cattle herders came to a seasonal lake called Nabta Playa. They came for the water, the grazing, the respite from their wandering. They left behind something extraordinary, Africa's oldest astronomical site, predating Stonehenge by 1,000 years and Egypt's pyramids by 3,000. The discovery came in 1974 when archaeologists stumbled upon carefully arranged stones forming circles, alignments, and what appeared to be intentional patterns. Initially dismissed as natural formations, subsequent excavation revealed human engineering on a scale that defied expectations. Stone circles, megalithic alignments, underground chambers lined with sculpted rocks, and most remarkably, what appears to be a calendar circle, a stone construction aligned to the cardinal directions and potentially tracking the summer solstice. Carbon dating and geological analysis pushed the site's origins back to approximately 7,500 BC for the earliest structures, with human activity in the area beginning around 9,000 BC. These were not settled farmers, but mobile pastoralists, yet they possessed astronomical knowledge sophisticated enough to track celestial events and encode them in stone. One arrangement, dubbed the calendar circle, consists of stone megaliths positioned to mark the rising of certain stars and the arrival of the annual monsoon rains. The alignment was precise. The construction required planning, astronomical observation over extended periods, and a cultural imperative to record this knowledge permanently. Other megalithic structures appear to point toward important stars on the horizon during the summer solstice, the time when the monsoon rains would arrive, filling the playa with life-giving water. The implications stretch far beyond mere astronomical curiosity. The creation of such a site requires a complex society with specialized knowledge keepers, people who could observe, calculate, remember, and teach. It suggests a culture with permanence despite its nomadic lifestyle, one that returns to this place generation after generation, maintaining and adding to the astronomical markers. It hints at a religious or ceremonial significance attached to the heavens, a belief system sophisticated enough to worship not just the immediate needs of survival, but the cosmic order itself. But perhaps most intriguing are the buried megaliths. Beneath some of the surface stones, archaeologists found carefully carved rocks buried in elaborate underground chambers. One sculpted stone resembles a cow. Another might represent a human figure. Why bury megaliths? What ritual purpose did these hidden stones serve? Were they offerings to underworld gods? Anchors for the above-ground astronomical markers? Or something else entirely, a symbolic binding of earth and sky, underworld and cosmos? The people of Nabta Playa vanished around 5500 BC, when the climate shifted again and the Sahara began its transformation into desert. But their legacy may have endured. Some researchers have suggested a tantalizing possibility that these cattle-herding astronomer priests, driven east by increasing desertification, migrated to the Nile Valley and brought their astronomical and architectural knowledge with them. Could the cosmic religion of Nabta Playa have influenced the star-gazing civilization that would eventually build the pyramids? The desert wind blows across Nabta Playa now, scouring the ancient stones, keeping its secrets.
25 meters beneath the waves off the southern coast of Yonaguni Island, Japan's westernmost territory, lies one of the most controversial archaeological discoveries of the modern era. The Yonaguni Monument, as it's come to be known, is a massive underwater formation of straight edges, right angles, platforms, and what appear to be carved stairs and terraces. The debate over whether it's a natural geological formation or a man-made structure has raged for 3 decades. And if it's man-made, it rewrites the maritime history of East Asia. Local diver Kihachiro Aratake discovered the formation in 1987 while searching for new hammerhead shark dive sites. What he found stopped him cold. A colossal stone structure rising from the sea floor, its surfaces too regular, its angles too precise to seem entirely natural. Marine geologist Masaaki Kimura of the University of the Ryukyus began investigating and has since dedicated his career to proving the monument's artificial origin. The structure measures roughly 150 meters long and 40 meters wide. It features parallel edges, clean right angles, and what Kimura identifies as quarry marks, tool scars, and intentional modifications. There are flat terraces, steps that seem designed for human traffic, a feature resembling a stone pillar, and what might be a carved human face. Other nearby formations show similar characteristics, suggesting if one is artificial, there may be an entire submerged complex. Here's where the mystery becomes a paradox. If the Yonaguni monument is man-made, it must have been constructed when the area was above water. Based on sea level rise following the last glacial maximum, this region would have been dry land somewhere between 12,000 and 8,000 BC. That places potential construction during or immediately after the end of the Ice Age, at a time when Japan was supposedly inhabited only by Jomon culture, hunter-gatherers, a people known for sophisticated pottery, but not for monumental stone architecture. Skeptics, including many geologists, argue the formation is entirely natural, the result of tectonic activity and erosion patterns common to sedimentary sandstone in the region. They point to the lack of tool marks visible in photographs, the absence of mortar or joining techniques, and the fact that no artifacts have been found in or around the structure. They argue that right angles and flat surfaces can occur naturally, especially in sedimentary rock that fractures along bedding planes. Kimura counters with detailed surveys showing features he insists are too regular, too purposeful to be natural. A stone that appears to have been moved and placed on a platform, channels that seem designed to direct water flow, carved symbols that resemble ancient petroglyphs. He's identified what he believes are paths, gates, and even a primitive form of writing. Other researchers have pointed to similar step pyramid structures found on land in Okinawa, suggesting a cultural tradition of creating such formations. The controversy remains unresolved, and perhaps unresolvable without more definitive evidence. But consider this. At the end of the last ice age, sea levels were 120 meters lower than today. Vast stretches of what is now ocean floor were dry land. The continental shelves, now submerged, would have been coastal plains, ideal locations for human habitation. If maritime cultures existed in this region during that period, virtually all evidence of their settlements would now be underwater. We know that seafaring was already well established by this time. Humans reached Australia at least 50,000 years ago, requiring ocean crossings. The peopling of the Pacific Islands demonstrates sophisticated navigation and boat building thousands of years before conventional history acknowledges such capabilities. Is it really so impossible that a coastal culture in Ice Age Japan developed stoneworking and architectural traditions that were subsequently drowned by rising seas? The Yonaguni monument might be a natural formation that happens to look artificial, or it might be the tip of an iceberg, the only visible remnant of a drowned world, a lost chapter of human history preserved in the deep.
Imagine a land bridge connecting Britain to continental Europe, not a narrow strip of exposed sea floor, but a vast, low-lying plain stretching from what is now Scotland to Denmark, from England to the Netherlands, an area larger than many modern countries. Rivers meander through valleys, herds of deer and aurochs graze on grasslands, marshes teem with waterfowl, and human communities, following the game and the seasons, build lives in this now vanished landscape. This was Doggerland, the lost world beneath the North Sea. For decades, fishermen trawling the North Sea have dredged up anomalies, worked flints, ancient bones, tools that clearly didn't belong on the ocean floor. These artifacts were curiosities, oddities to be mentioned in pub stories, and mostly ignored by academia. But as the evidence accumulated and mapping technology advanced, archaeologists began to realize they were looking at the remnants of a drowned country, a submerged extension of Europe, inhabited continuously for thousands of years until rising seas consumed it. Doggerland's story begins around 20,000 BC, at the peak of the last glacial maximum, when so much water was locked in ice sheets that sea levels dropped dramatically. What is now the North Sea was then a plain of hills, river valleys, and coastlines. As the Ice Age waned and temperatures rose, this became prime real estate for Mesolithic hunter-gatherers. The region would have been rich in resources, fresh water from numerous rivers, marshlands providing birds and fish, forests offering game and plants. Archaeological evidence suggests it wasn't just a corridor humans passed through, but a homeland where cultures developed and thrived. Seismic surveys of the North Sea floor reveal a drowned landscape of incredible detail. River channels scoring the sea floor, valley systems, escarpments, and hills, features that can only have formed above water. Bathymetry mapping has produced ghostly images of this lost world, showing a landscape that would have been ideal for human habitation. Core samples from the seafloor have yielded pollen, plant remains, and geological evidence painting a picture of the environment: temperate woodlands, wetlands, and grasslands. The human remains and artifacts are tantalizing but fragmentary. Stone tools of various types and periods, bone harpoons, worked antlers, the famous peat and wood from what was clearly dry land when it formed. Each trawler catch adds another piece to the puzzle, but archaeologists face an enormous challenge. Excavating underwater sites is expensive and difficult, and the material evidence is scattered across thousands of square kilometers of seafloor, disturbed by currents, buried under marine sediments, or destroyed by bottom trawling. The end came catastrophically. Between 8,500 and 6,000 BC, Doggerland was progressively inundated by rising sea levels. But the final chapter may have been especially dramatic. Around 6,200 BC, a massive underwater landslide off the coast of Norway, the Storegga Slide, generated a tsunami that devastated whatever low-lying portions of Doggerland remained above water. Geological evidence from Scotland and northeastern England confirms a massive wave struck these coasts. For any remaining communities on Doggerland, this would have been an apocalyptic event, the literal end of their world. What makes Doggerland so haunting is not just that it existed, but what its existence implies. For thousands of years, Britain was not an island, but part of a continuous landmass. The people we called British were simply Europeans who happened to live on the western edge of the continent. The cultures, the movements, the interactions of Mesolithic Europe were fundamentally different than our island-focused historical narratives suggest. And when the seas rose, everything, settlements, traditions, stories, was erased, surviving only in myth. Some researchers have speculated that folk memories of Doggerland's inundation might have contributed to flood legends throughout northern Europe. Could stories of a great deluge, passed down through countless generations, preserve echoes of real events, of homelands lost to rising waters? It's impossible to prove, but also impossible to dismiss. Today, wind farms rise from the North Sea, their foundations planted in the submerged soil of Doggerland. Beneath the waves, buried in sediment, an entire world waits. Settlements we'll never find, stories we'll never hear, lives lived and lost in a land whose name we barely remember. High in the Andes, at an elevation where the air is thin and the sun burns fierce, stand monuments that defy easy explanation. Tiwanaku, near Lake Titicaca in Bolivia. Sacsayhuaman, above Cuzco in Peru. Pumapunku, with its precisely cut stones. We know these places were important to the Inca, but the Inca themselves claimed they didn't build the oldest structures. They said these megalithic foundations were already ancient when their ancestors arrived, built by a vanished race of giants or gods in a previous age of the world. For a long time, archaeologists dismissed such claims as mythology. The scientific consensus dated Tiwanaku to around 200 BC, attributing all construction to known pre-Incan cultures. But recent investigations have complicated this timeline, suggesting that some of the megalithic work may be far older, potentially stretching back to the end of the Ice Age. Let's focus on Pumapunku, about a kilometer from the main Tiwanaku site. Here lie massive stone blocks, some weighing over 100 tons, cut from andesite and diorite, extremely hard volcanic rocks, with precision that seems impossible for ancient technology. The stones feature perfectly flat surfaces, sharp right angles, and complex interlocking joints. Some blocks have matching notches and protrusions, cut with such accuracy that even modern engineers marvel at the precision. These aren't rough-hewn stones pounded into approximate shapes. These are precision-machined components, cut as if with machinery. The conventional dating places Pumapunku's construction around 500–600 AD, but several factors suggest an earlier phase. First, there's the geological evidence of massive flooding at Lake Titicaca, flooding that occurred at the end of the Ice Age when glacial lake outbursts and climate shifts dramatically affected the region. Some of the megalithic blocks at Pumapunku appear to have been disturbed by water action, suggesting they predate these flood events and were subsequently partially destroyed and perhaps partially rebuilt by later cultures. Second, there's the issue of the stone-working technology. The type of precision cutting seen in the oldest megalithic blocks has no developmental sequence in the archaeological record. It appears fully formed without earlier, cruder examples showing technological evolution. This pattern is seen across several Andean sites. The oldest megalithic work is often the most sophisticated, with later construction showing progressively less skill. It's as if the knowledge of how to work these enormous stones with such precision was possessed, then gradually lost. Third, there are astronomical alignments. Tiwanaku's main structures align with celestial events, but these alignments may fit best with the positions of stars and the equinoxes as they appeared around 10,000 BC due to precession. This is controversial and not widely accepted, but some archaeoastronomers have suggested that at least the planning or sacred geography of the site could incorporate knowledge from much earlier periods. The mystery deepens when you consider the logistics. Tiwanaku sits at nearly 13,000 feet elevation. The stones were quarried from sites many miles away, then transported across difficult terrain and somehow lifted and positioned with millimeter precision. The civilization that accomplished this left no written records explaining their methods. Later cultures found the ruins and built atop them, incorporating the ancient stones into their own structures, but apparently unable to replicate the original construction techniques. Who were these builders? One provocative theory suggests that during the African humid period and the end of the Ice Age, when Lake Titicaca was much larger and the Andean Plateau supported a different climate, an advanced culture developed here. They built in stone because stone endures. They encoded astronomical knowledge because the heavens were their calendar and their gods. And when the climate changed, when the Ice Age ended and the world transformed, they vanished, leaving only these monuments to mark their passage through time. The Inca inherited these sites and considered them sacred. They told the Spanish conquistadors that the stones had been set in place by the gods themselves, carried by sound or magic, moved by beings more powerful than men. What if these weren't fantasies, but faded memories? What if the Inca preserved fragmented stories of a predecessor culture so ancient and sophisticated that they seemed godlike? Modern archaeology resists such speculation, preferring explanations grounded in known cultures and technologies. And perhaps they're right. Perhaps Pumapunku and its kin were built exactly when the conventional dates suggest, by cultures whose capabilities we simply underestimate. But the precision of the stones remain. The mysteries of their construction persist. And the question haunts every archaeologist who stands among those scattered blocks. Could there have been an older civilization here, one that rose and fell while Europe was still under ice, leaving only these enigmatic monuments to mark their passage through time?
Every culture on Earth has a flood myth, from the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh to the biblical Noah. From Hindu texts describing Manu's Ark to Native American legends of world-covering waters, stories of a catastrophic deluge appear across time and geography. For centuries, these were dismissed as fantasy or metaphor. Then, in the 1990s, marine geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman proposed a theory that stunned the archaeological community. What if many of these flood myths were memories of a real event? Their focus was the Black Sea. Today, it's a large body of salt water connected to the Mediterranean through the narrow Bosporus Strait. But core samples from the Black Sea floor told a different story. Deep beneath the current seabed, Ryan and Pittman found evidence of an ancient freshwater lake, complete with freshwater mollusks and beach deposits. Then, around 5600 BC, everything changed. The sediments suddenly shifted to saltwater species. The lake had become a sea. The geological evidence suggests a catastrophic scenario. At the end of the Ice Age, as glaciers melted and sea levels rose worldwide, the Mediterranean gradually climbed higher. The Bosporus region, then a strip of dry land, acted as a dam holding back the salt water. But as the Mediterranean continued to rise, the pressure mounted. Eventually, around 7,600 years ago, the dam failed. Mediterranean water burst through the Bosporus in a cataclysmic flood. The calculations are staggering. Ryan and Pittman estimated that water poured through the breach at a rate 200 times greater than Niagara Falls. The Black Sea's water level rose dramatically, potentially as much as hundreds of feet. Shorelines receded at the rate of a mile a day. Freshwater lake became saltwater sea in perhaps just a few years. Any settlements on the shores of the old lake would have been inundated, their inhabitants forced to flee or drown. The theory is controversial. Some geological studies support it, others suggest the transition was more gradual. But what makes the Black Sea flood hypothesis so compelling is not just the geology, but the archaeology and anthropology. The Black Sea Basin in the late Ice Age and early Holocene would have been prime real estate.
A huge freshwater lake, fed by rivers, surrounded by fertile land, supporting abundant wildlife. It's exactly where you'd expect substantial human populations to settle. If communities thrived on these shores and were suddenly catastrophically displaced, where would they go? They'd flee inland, carrying their stories with them. Ryan and Pittman suggest this diaspora might explain the sudden appearance of farming cultures in Europe and the Middle East around 5600 BC. Refugees from the flood, the theory goes, spread agricultural knowledge as they scattered, seeding the Neolithic Revolution across a wide area. More provocatively, could the traumatic memory of this event be the source of the deluge myths? Imagine you're a survivor. The water that had been your life source, stable for generations, suddenly becomes an invading monster. In a matter of days, everything you know is underwater. You flee with whatever you can carry. That story would be told and retold, parent to child, generation after generation. Over thousands of years, the details would change. The flood becomes worldwide. The time span expands. Gods and heroes enter the narrative. But the emotional core, the terror and loss, would remain. Not everyone accepts this connection. Critics point out that flood myths appear in regions nowhere near the Black Sea, that many cultures developed deluge stories independently, likely inspired by local floods, tsunamis, or other water-related disasters. The universality of flood myths, they argue, reflects the universal human experience of living near water and occasionally experiencing its destructive power, not a single global or even regional event. But there's another layer to consider. The Black Sea flood wasn't the only such event at the end of the Ice Age. Around the world, as glaciers melted, catastrophic outburst floods reshaped landscapes. Glacial Lake Agassiz in North America emptied multiple times in massive floods that affected global sea levels and climate. The English Channel may have been carved in part by a catastrophic breach around 6500 BC that finally separated Britain from Europe. The Persian Gulf Basin filled with water during this same period. Doggerland, as we've discussed, was progressively inundated. What if the answer isn't either or, but both? What if flood myths are universal not because of a single event, but because the end of the Ice Age was an era of floods? Coastlines worldwide were drowned, river valleys flooded, glacial outbursts devastated entire regions. For communities living through this period of climate upheaval, water was the enemy that kept coming, generation after generation, slowly swallowing the world they knew. The Black Sea flood may have been particularly dramatic and particularly well remembered because of its sudden, catastrophic nature and the population density around the basin. But it was part of a broader phenomenon, a world being reshaped by water, coastlines redrawn, lands drowned, peoples displaced. In this context, the persistence of flood myths across cultures makes perfect sense. They're not fantasy, they're history, transmitted through the only medium available to pre-literate cultures, story. Somewhere beneath the Black Sea's waters lie the remains of that ancient world. Drowned villages, tools, perhaps even bodies, trapped in the sediment where they fell 7,600 years ago. Underwater archaeologists have begun exploring, but the Black Sea is large and deep. The secrets it holds remain mostly hidden, preserved in darkness, waiting for the light.
The disappearance of the Clovis culture. For decades, the Clovis people were considered America's first humans.
named after a site near Clovis, New Mexico, where distinctive fluted spear points were first discovered. The Clovis culture appeared in the archaeological record around 13,000 years ago, and then vanished suddenly around 10,900 BC. Their disappearance coincides with one of the most dramatic events in recent geological history, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, a rapid return to Ice Age conditions that lasted over 1,000 years. The Clovis people were sophisticated hunters who thrived during the late Pleistocene. Their distinctive fluted projectile points, beautifully crafted stone spear tips with a characteristic channel or flute running part of their length, have been found from Alaska to Mexico, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. These points represent advanced stoneworking technology, carefully designed for maximum penetration when hunting megafauna, mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, and other now extinct Ice Age beasts. And then, around 12,900 years ago, everything changed. The archaeological record shows a sudden disruption. Clovis points disappear. Evidence of large-scale hunting declines. Many of the megafauna species hunted by Clovis people go extinct in a relatively short time window, the end Pleistocene extinction event that saw the loss of roughly 35 genera of large mammals in North America. For years, the explanation was straightforward. The Clovis people overhunted their prey, causing the extinctions, and when the megafauna disappeared, Clovis culture could no longer sustain itself and transitioned to other lifestyles. But this overkill hypothesis had problems. Could human hunters really drive so many species extinct so quickly? And why did the extinctions coincide with the beginning of the Younger Dryas, a dramatic climate reversal that plunged the northern hemisphere back into near-glacial conditions? In 2007, a team of researchers proposed a controversial alternative, the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. They presented evidence for a cosmic impact, either a comet or asteroid fragment that struck North America around 12,900 years ago. The impact, or airburst, they argued, triggered massive wildfires across the continent, decimated megafauna populations, disrupted Clovis culture, and kicked off the Younger Dryas cold period by altering atmospheric and oceanic circulation. The evidence they cited includes a thin layer of sediment dated to the right period containing high concentrations of microscopic diamonds, iridium, magnetic spherules, and other materials consistent with an impact. They point to a carbon-rich black matte layer found at numerous Clovis sites, suggesting widespread burning. Some researchers have even proposed specific impact locations, including the Greenland ice sheet, where a massive crater was recently discovered that might date to the right period. The hypothesis remains deeply controversial. Many scientists argue the evidence is insufficient or misinterpreted, that the markers claimed as impact indicators can form through other processes, and that no definitive crater or impact structure has been confirmed. They maintain that climate change and human hunting adequately explain both the extinctions and the cultural transitions without invoking cosmic catastrophe. But here's what makes the mystery so compelling. Something dramatic definitely happened at the end of the Clovis period. The climate did shift abruptly into the Younger Dryas cold spell. Dozens of megafauna species did go extinct in a narrow time window. Clovis culture did disappear or transform rapidly. Whether the cause was cosmic impact, climate change, human activity, or some combination, the effect was a fundamental reshaping of the North American landscape and its human inhabitants. After Clovis, the archaeological record fragments into regional variations, the Folsom tradition with its distinctive points, other localized cultures adapting to new prey and new conditions. Native American oral traditions preserve stories of great catastrophes, of fire from the sky, of cold and darkness, and the dying of animals. Are these memories of the Younger Dryas, of impacts, of the great extinctions? Without written records, we can't know for certain. What we do know is that the Americas at the end of the Ice Age were a far more complex place than the simple Clovis first narrative suggested. Recent discoveries of pre-Clovis sites push human presence in the Americas back even further. The Clovis people were not the first Americans, and their disappearance was not the end of the story, but a chapter in a much longer history. Still, their sudden exit from the archaeological record haunts researchers. It reminds us how fragile human cultures are, how quickly they can be disrupted or destroyed by forces beyond their control. Whether the Clovis people were struck by a cosmic catastrophe or simply couldn't adapt to rapidly changing conditions, their story ended in the space of a few generations. They left behind their beautifully crafted spear points, found in caches, sometimes by the hundreds, as if stockpiled for a crisis that would never be resolved. And then, silence. Broken only by the wind blowing across the changed continent, carrying the ashes of a vanished age.
The ancient DNA anomalies of Siberia. The Denisova Cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia is an unremarkable place, hardly the setting for a revolution in human evolutionary understanding. Yet from this cave's sediments has emerged evidence that rewrites the story of human origins. Evidence of mysterious hominin populations who left traces in our DNA, but barely any trace in the physical record. In 2008, Russian archaeologists excavating the cave found a finger bone fragment dated to approximately 41,000 years ago. When the DNA was sequenced, scientists expected to find either modern human or Neanderthal genetic material. Instead, they discovered something else entirely, a previously unknown species or subspecies of human, now called Denisovans, after the cave. The Denisovans existed during the same period as both modern humans and Neanderthals. Genetic analysis suggests they split from the Neanderthal line around 400,000 years ago. For tens of thousands of years, they inhabited Asia, possibly ranging from Siberia to Southeast Asia to Oceania. And they interbred with modern humans, leaving genetic markers that persist in populations today, particularly in Melanesia and indigenous Australians, where Denisovan ancestry can comprise up to 5% of the genome. But here's the mystery. Aside from a handful of bone fragments and teeth from Denisova Cave, and a recently identified jawbone from Tibet, we have almost no physical evidence of these people. No complete skeletons, no clear archaeological culture we can point to as Denisovan, no art or tools definitively attributed to them. They are, in essence, a ghost population, known almost entirely through the traces they left in our genes. The implications are staggering. Ancient DNA analysis has revealed that the story of human evolution is not a simple linear progression, but a tangled web of interbreeding populations. Modern humans didn't simply replace all other hominins, we merged with them. The Denisovan discovery suggests that multiple human species or subspecies coexisted and interbred across Asia and Oceania during the late Pleistocene, creating a complex genetic landscape we're only beginning to understand. More recent discoveries have deepened the mystery. In 2019, researchers announced the identification of Denisova 11, a bone fragment from a girl who lived approximately 90,000 years ago.
DNA analysis revealed something unprecedented. Her mother was a Neanderthal, and her father was a Denisovan. This direct evidence of hybridization between two distinct hominin groups proves that interbreeding wasn't rare or accidental, but part of the fabric of Ice Age human interactions. Even more intriguing are hints of other ghost populations in our DNA. Genetic sequences that appear to come from yet another unknown human species, one that hasn't been identified in the fossil record at all. How many different types of humans were wandering the Earth during the Ice Age? How often did they meet, trade, fight, and interbreed? The Denisovan discovery forces us to reconsider the capabilities of these archaic humans. The Denisovan jawbone found in Tibet dates to at least 160,000 years ago and was found at an elevation of over 10,000 feet. This suggests Denisovans had adapted to high-altitude environments, an impressive feat requiring genetic and cultural adaptations. Indeed, modern Tibetans carry a Denisovan gene variant that helps them survive at extreme elevations, a genetic gift inherited from these ancient cousins. There are tantalizing hints that Denisovans possessed sophisticated cultural abilities. The Denisova cave itself contains a rich archaeological record spanning hundreds of thousands of years, with advanced stone tools, bone tools, and even what appears to be jewelry, a bracelet made from polished green stone dated to around 40,000 years ago. Whether this was made by Denisovans, Neanderthals, or modern humans remains uncertain, but the cave's layers show that multiple hominin species occupied this single location over time, possibly overlapping. The mystery extends to how far Denisovans traveled and how diverse they were genetically. The genetic analysis suggests there were at least two distinct Denisovan populations, possibly more, separated by geography and time. Some may have reached Southeast Asia and the Philippines, where the recently discovered Homo luzonensis adds yet another hominin species to the mix. Others may have inhabited the vast expanses of Siberia and Central Asia, regions where archaeological evidence is sparse and where countless sites remain undiscovered beneath taiga and steppe. Perhaps most haunting is what the Denisovan discovery reveals about our ignorance. For the vast majority of human evolutionary history, we have almost no written records, limited archaeological evidence, and preservation conditions that favor only certain environments. Entire populations can vanish from the physical record, leaving only the ghostly traces they embedded in our DNA. How many other human species existed? How many rose and fell in regions where fossils don't preserve, or where we simply haven't looked? The Denisovans remind us that the human family tree is not a simple diagram, but a thicket of branches merging and diverging, some thriving and others vanishing. Around 10,000 BC, at the end of the Ice Age, Homo sapiens was the last hominin standing. But for hundreds of thousands of years before that, we shared the world with cousins, Neanderthals in Europe and the Near East, Denisovans in Asia, possibly others we haven't yet discovered. We met with them, bred with them, and absorbed their genetic heritage. In the Altai Mountains, the wind still blows through Denisova Cave as it has for millennia. The sediments hold more secrets, waiting for patient excavation. And in the DNA of people around the world, particularly in island Southeast Asia and Oceania, the Denisovans persist, an echo of humanity that vanished from the earth, but not entirely from existence, carried forward in the genetic code of their descendants.
For decades, the narrative of human artistic development was Eurocentric. Cave art, we were told, began in Europe, Lascaux in France, Altamira in Spain, around 30 to 40,000 years ago. These were considered humanity's first great artworks, evidence of the Upper Paleolithic Revolution, when our ancestors supposedly became fully modern, cognitively complete. Everywhere else in the world, the thinking went, was derivative or later. Then came Sulawesi, an Indonesian island east of Borneo, and everything changed. In caves tucked into the karst limestone hills of Sulawesi's Maros Pangkep region, archaeologists have documented over 100 prehistoric cave art sites. Hand stencils, created by blowing pigment around a hand pressed against the rock, appear alongside images of local animals, the baribusa or pig deer, the Anoa dwarf buffalo, and other creatures of the Pleistocene landscape. For years, these paintings were known, but considered relatively recent, perhaps only a few thousand years old. In 2014, uranium series dating of the mineral deposits that had formed over the paintings revealed their true age. The oldest hand stencil dated to at least 39,900 years ago. A painting of a baribusa was at least 35,400 years old. These weren't recent artworks. They were contemporary with, or even older than the earliest European cave art. The implications reverberated through the archaeological community. Humans hadn't invented art in Europe and then spread it to the rest of the world. Art had emerged independently, or perhaps art was already part of human culture when modern humans left Africa. The capacity for symbolic thought, for creating images that represent rather than simply exist, was not a European innovation, but a fundamental human trait that expressed itself wherever humans went. Further research has revealed even more surprising discoveries. In 2019, researchers announced the dating of a cave painting in another Sulawesi cave, showing what appears to be a hunting scene. Human-like figures with spears surrounding wild pigs and anoa. Using the same uranium series method, they dated this scene to at least 43,900 years ago, making it potentially the world's oldest known figurative artwork, and the earliest evidence of humans telling stories through images. This hunting scene is remarkably sophisticated. It depicts not just isolated animals, but a narrative, multiple figures interacting in a purposeful activity. The human-like figures have both human and animal characteristics, possibly representing therianthropes, that is, part human, part animal beings, common in later mythologies worldwide. If this interpretation is correct, it suggests that 44,000 years ago, humans in Sulawesi were already creating mythological narratives, imagining supernatural beings, and recording these concepts in permanent visual form. The mystery deepens when you consider the implications for human migration and cultural development. Modern humans reached Australia by at least 65,000 years ago, possibly earlier. To get there, they had to pass through or near Sulawesi, island hopping across Indonesia. This means anatomically modern humans with the capacity for art, symbolism, and seafaring were already present in Southeast Asia tens of thousands of years before the European cave art tradition began. What happened to the art created in the intervening millennia? In tropical environments, preservation is poor. Organic materials decay rapidly. Rock art exposed to weathering deteriorates. The Sulawesi paintings survive because of the cave environment and the fortunate formation of protective mineral crusts. How much art was created on bark, hide, wood, or exposed rock faces and simply vanished? How many masterpieces rotted away in the tropical heat, leaving no trace? More fundamentally, the Sulawesi discoveries challenge our assumptions about cultural evolution. If humans in Southeast Asia were creating sophisticated figurative art and mythological narratives 44,000 years ago, what else were they doing? What stories did they tell? What beliefs did they hold? What technologies did they develop? The material record is frustratingly sparse. Tropical environments preserve almost nothing. But the glimpses we have do suggest cognitive and cultural sophistication equal to anything in Ice Age Europe. There's also the tantalizing question of whether the Sulawesi artists encountered other human species. At 40,000 years ago, Denisovans were still present in the region, as were other archaic hominins like Homo floresiensis on nearby Flores. Did they meet? Did they communicate? Could the therianthropic figures in the hunting scene represent actual memories of encountering beings that were human but not quite human? People who looked different but could perhaps be understood? We'll likely never know. But standing in those caves today, looking at the red ochre handprints, someone's actual hand pressed against the stone 40,000 years ago, you feel the weight of that connection. That person was fully human, fully us, in every way that matters. They had thoughts, emotions, artistic vision. They wanted to leave a mark, to say, I was here, in a medium that would outlast their brief life. And they succeeded beyond anything they could have imagined. Their hands reached across 40 centuries to touch ours. The Sulawesi cave art is a reminder that human creativity, symbolic thought, and the need to create meaning through art are not recent developments or cultural inventions. They are part of what it means to be human, as fundamental as language or tool use. And they were expressed not just in one favored location, but wherever humans went, from the frozen caves of Europe to the tropical karst hills of Indonesia.
In the arid Supe Valley of Peru, just inland from the Pacific coast, lies Caral, a sprawling complex of plazas, pyramids, and residential areas that represents one of the oldest cities in the Americas. When radiocarbon dating confirmed that Caral's main construction phase occurred around 2600 BC, the archaeological world was stunned. This was contemporary with the early Egyptian pyramids and predated the Maya by over 2,000 years. But recent evidence suggests Caral's story might begin even earlier, with roots stretching back toward that mysterious threshold of 10,000 BC. Caral is massive, covering over 150 acres with monumental architecture, including 6 large pyramidal structures, the largest rising over 80 feet. The city shows clear urban planning with distinct residential, administrative, and ceremonial areas. There's evidence of a complex society with social stratification, organized labor, long-distance trade, and sophisticated engineering. The plaza layouts suggest large public gatherings, ceremonies, and communal activities. This was not a village that grew into a town. This was a city, designed and built according to a plan. What makes Caral so remarkable is not just its age, but what's missing: fortifications and weapons. Unlike most early civilizations, which were often warlike and militaristic, Caral shows no evidence of warfare. No defensive walls, no weapons caches, no images of combat or warriors. Instead, the archaeological evidence points to a society based on trade, particularly the exchange of fish from the coast for agricultural products from the interior. It appears Caral thrived as a peaceful trading center sustained by the bounty of the Pacific and the agricultural productivity of the valley. But here's where the mystery deepens. Caral didn't emerge from nowhere. The sophisticated construction techniques, the urban planning, the organizational capacity required to build those pyramids all suggest a long developmental history. Yet archaeologists haven't found clear precursor sites showing a gradual evolution from simple villages to Caral's urban complexity. It's as if the knowledge of how to build cities appeared, if not fully formed, then far more developed than the timeline should allow. Recent excavations in the Supe Valley and surrounding regions have pushed evidence of monumental construction earlier. Other sites showing pyramidal structures and complex planning have been dated to 3500 to 3500 BC. Some researchers argue that the Norte Chico civilization, of which Caral was the largest city, represents a continuous development stretching back much further, potentially to 8,000 or even 10,000 BC in its earliest phases, though direct evidence for such early dates remains controversial and debated. The climate history of the region adds another layer to the puzzle. At the end of the Ice Age, around 10,000 BC, the Peruvian coast and the adjacent Pacific were undergoing dramatic changes. The cold, nutrient-rich Humboldt Current was establishing its modern pattern, creating some of the richest fishing grounds in the world. This sudden abundance of marine resources would have supported larger populations and more complex social organization. Could this climatic shift have catalyzed cultural developments that eventually led to Caral? There's also the question of what preceded Caral. The Norte Chico region is now desert, but in the early Holocene, it may have been more hospitable. Any earlier settlements would have been built of organic materials, wood, reeds, adobe, that decay rapidly in this environment. The monumental stone architecture of Caral survives, but earlier phases of development built in perishable materials would leave almost no trace. We may be looking at only the final, most permanent expression of a much longer cultural tradition. The Caral civilization thrived for about 500 years, from roughly 2600 to 2100 BC, then was mysteriously abandoned. Some evidence suggests a major earthquake or series of earthquakes may have contributed to the city's decline, though climate change and shifting trade patterns likely played roles as well. The people didn't vanish. Their descendants continued in the region, but the city itself was abandoned, slowly buried by wind-blown sand and sediment, forgotten for over 4,000 years. When archaeologist Ruth Shady began excavating Caral in 1994, she was uncovering not just one lost city, but evidence that challenged fundamental assumptions about New World prehistory. The conventional view held that complex societies in the Americas developed later than in the Old World and were less sophisticated. Caral proved that urban civilization in the Americas was as old as the pyramids of Egypt and Mesopotamian cities, developing independently and following its own unique trajectory. But the deeper question remains: what came before? If Caral represents the culmination of a long development, where are the earlier phases? Are they buried under desert sands, waiting for discovery? Were they built in locations now underwater, drowned by sea level rise since the Ice Age? Or did the knowledge come from somewhere else? From coastal populations whose settlements are now beneath the Pacific. The Pacific coast of South America at the end of the Ice Age would have been very different. Sea levels were lower, exposing continental shelf that is now submerged. Major river valleys that now end at the current coastline would have extended further out. Any coastal settlements from 10,000 BC would now be underwater, destroyed by waves and currents, accessible only to marine archaeologists with sophisticated equipment. This is the haunting possibility that Caral raises, that we're seeing only a fragment of the story. The oldest city we found may not be the first city. The ancient monument may not be the earliest monument. Beneath the waves, beneath the sands, buried under millennia of sediment and forgetting, there may be older chapters, precursor cultures that developed the knowledge, the techniques, the social organization that made Caral possible. Standing in the plaza of Caral today, looking up at the stepped pyramids rising against the Andean foothills, you can imagine the gatherings that once filled this space. Thousands of people, trading goods, sharing news, participating in ceremonies, musicians playing bone flutes, dozens have been found at the site. Shamans or priests conducting rituals whose purpose we can only guess. Children playing in the shadows of monuments their grandparents helped build. All of that is gone now, carried away by time. But the stones remain, and the questions they raise echo across the centuries. How old is civilization really? When did humans first organize into cities, build monuments, create the complex social structures we recognize as the foundation of urban life? Corral suggests the answer is older than we thought. And if older than we thought, then perhaps older still, reaching back into that liminal zone between history and prehistory, between the ice and the cities, between the forgotten past and the recorded present.
We've journeyed across continents and through 12,000 years, from the megalithic temples of Göbekli Tepe to the astronomical markers of Nabta Playa, from the drowned world of Doggerland to the submerged mysteries off Yonaguni, from the precision-cut stones of the Andes to the haunting handprints in Sulawesi caves. Each site, each discovery, each mystery pulls at the threads of our understanding, unraveling the neat story we've told ourselves about human origins and the birth of civilization. What emerges from this journey is not a single revelation, but a pattern, a suggestion that the period around 10,000 BC was far more dynamic, far more significant than we've acknowledged. This wasn't just the end of the Ice Age in geological terms. It was a crucible of human development, a time when cultures rose and fell, when knowledge was gained and lost, when the foundations of what we call civilization were laid by people whose names we'll never know. Consider what the world lost during this period. Sea levels rose over 400 feet from their Ice Age low points, drowning millions of square miles of coastal land. Entire landscapes, Doggerland, Sundaland in Southeast Asia, the exposed continental shelves worldwide were submerged. If human populations favored coastal areas, as modern humans do, then the archaeological record of early human complexity may lie primarily underwater, scattered across the submerged shelves of every continent. We are excavating the highlands and the inland sites because that's what remains accessible, but we may be missing the core of the story. Climate change at the end of the Ice Age was not gradual, but punctuated by rapid shifts, warming periods followed by sudden cooling events like the Younger Dryas, regional disasters like the Black Sea flood, catastrophic events that could devastate entire populations. Any culture living through this era had to be adaptable, resilient, and sophisticated enough to respond to rapidly changing conditions. Those that couldn't adapt vanished, leaving at most a few scattered artifacts and enigmatic monuments. The archaeological evidence we've examined suggests that our ancestors during this period possessed capabilities we're only beginning to appreciate. They were astronomical observers sophisticated enough to track celestial cycles and encode them in stone. They were architects capable of precision engineering with massive blocks. They were artists creating mythological narratives in permanent media. They were seafarers crossing open ocean. They were social organizers mobilizing labor forces for monumental projects. They were, in every meaningful sense, us, just living in a world that no longer exists. Yet these cultures left almost no written records, no texts explaining their beliefs, their knowledge, their understanding of the world. We're left to interpret mute stones and faded paintings, to excavate ruins and analyze DNA, to piece together stories from fragments and hope we're seeing the truth. It's like trying to understand contemporary civilization by examining only its sewers and parking lots, while all the books, all the art, all the digital records have vanished. We see the infrastructure, but miss the meaning. This is perhaps the deepest mystery of 10,000 BC, not what these cultures accomplished, but what they knew. Did the builders of Göbekli Tepe possess astronomical knowledge we've lost? Did the Denisovans have languages, stories, technologies that vanished with them? Did the drowned coastal cultures of Doggerland or Sundaland develop wisdom about the ocean, about climate, about living sustainably with nature that we desperately need today? The knowledge that dies with a culture is immeasurable, and dozens of cultures died during the tumultuous end of the Ice Age.
What persists are echoes, flood myths preserving memories of rising seas, stories of golden ages and lost lands, legends of ancient wisdom and vanished peoples. Modern archaeology increasingly suggests these aren't pure fantasy, but distorted memories, oral histories passed down through so many generations that fact becomes myth. The challenge is separating the historical core from the mythological embellishment, a challenge that may be impossible to fully resolve, but remains worth attempting. The mysteries we've explored, Göbekli Tepe's purpose, Nabta Playa's astronomers, Yonaguni's origin, Doggerland's fate, the Andean megalith builders, the Black Sea flood, the Clovis disappearance, the Denisovan ghosts, the Sulawesi artists, and Keral's precursors are not isolated puzzles. They're pieces of a larger mosaic depicting a lost world. A world where humanity was already old, already sophisticated, already capable of greatness and tragedy. These mysteries haunt archaeologists, not because they can't be solved, many may eventually yield to careful excavation and analysis, but because of what they represent, the humbling recognition of how much we don't know. Every answer reveals new questions. Every discovery suggests 10 more sites waiting to be found. The past is not a completed book, but an ongoing investigation, and we've barely begun to read the earliest chapters. As you go about your day, remember that beneath your feet, beneath the oceans, beneath the accumulated debris of 12,000 years of human history, lie the ruins of worlds we've forgotten. Cities drowned by rising seas, temples buried by desert sands, art hidden in dark caves, the DNA of vanished peoples carried in our genes. They're still here if you know where to look, still speaking if you know how to listen. The archaeologists will keep digging. The marine surveyors will keep mapping the ocean floor. The geneticists will keep sequencing ancient DNA. And slowly, fragment by fragment, we'll recover more of the story. But some mysteries may never be fully solved. Some secrets may remain buried forever. Some questions may outlive our civilization, just as the stones of Göbekli Tepe outlived the people who carved them. Perhaps that's as it should be. Perhaps mystery is the appropriate response to deep time, to the vast sweep of human existence. We've only been recording our history and writing for 5,000 years, a blink in the 200,000-year story of Homo sapiens. Before the writing, before the cities we know, before the civilizations that left abundant records, there was something else, something we're only now beginning to glimpse. The ruins are patient. The stones don't hurry to give up their secrets. And somewhere beneath the waves or the sand or the forest floor, other mysteries wait. Monuments we haven't found, cultures we haven't named, stories we haven't heard. Perhaps the story of humanity didn't begin in written history, but in the silent ruins of 10,000 BC, in the twilight of the Ice Age, when the old world drowned and the new world was born, and our ancestors stood at the threshold of everything we would become. The mystery endures, the search continues, and the ghosts of our forgotten past still walk the boundary between memory and myth, waiting to be remembered.